Two individuals fated to meet, and everything changes. Nicknamed Ken and Barbie, this story is about to take a turn from the normal Ken and Barbie that we know. Two criminals who believed they were on top of the world. At least 13 rapes and 3 murders in and around Toronto between 1986 and 1992. Paul was born in 1964 in Scarborough, a district of Ontario, Canada. He was the youngest of 3 and his parents' marriage was an unhappy one. His mother, Marilyn, was forced to marry someone she didn't want to by her father. Kenneth Bernardo would later face charges for peeping and paedophilia. He was also abusive to other members of the family and had molested Paul's sister. Marilyn was in a depressive state and would leave her family unattended to visit other relatives during the weekend, and eventually she stayed in the basement. Paul seemed to be oblivious that he had a broken home life and was described by others as a happy child, but he also gained a compulsion to make fires during his time in the Boy Scouts when he was 10 years old. In 1981, Paul was 16, and he suffered 2 setbacks that affected his life. He told, after an argument between his parents, that his father Kenneth was not his biological father, but he had been conceived as a result of a sexual encounter between his mother Marilyn and the person she really wanted to marry. Paul was completely repulsed by this and called his mother a slut and a whore. She then called him a bastard. When Paul eventually had his first girlfriend, Nadine Brammer, she ended up leaving him for one of his friends. She had become tired of his controlling behaviour, and Paul retaliated by incinerating everything that she had given him. He graduated from Sir Wilfrid Laurier Collegiate Institute. After this, he became an employee of the American company Amway, whose products and culture deeply influenced him. He bought books and tapes from famous motivational speakers and applied their lessons when he and his friends met young women in bars, seducing many successfully. Once he was attending University of Toronto at Scarborough, Paul had developed dark sexual fantasies, one of which was building a virgin farm where he would breed virgin girls to rape. He enjoyed forceful sexual acts and degrading his dates in public. Over time, his relationships became shorter and he would frequently date more than one woman at the same time. In all cases, he was abusive and threatened to kill his girlfriends if they spoke to other people about the treatment he subjected them to. In 1986, 2 women were granted restraining orders against him for making obscene phone calls to them, and he might have begun his raping spree already at this time. Karla was born in 1970 in Port Credit, Ontario, to a travelling salesman, Karla Homolka, an alcoholic Czech immigrant, and his wife, Dorothy Sager, a geriatric clinic employee. Karla had 2 younger sisters, Laurie and Tammy. Karla was a bright child and a good student that was doted on by her father, but he would also insult her and her mother and her sisters during drunken episodes. They took refuge in the basement where he would get into arguments with them. When the marriage faltered, Carol took on a mistress, and Dorothy's response to this was to propose a threesome and keep going on with life as normal. The dynamic started to change dramatically. From a young age, Karla was described as stubborn and domineering, being unable to compromise with other children and always willing to speak her mind to adults. She had a depressive episode after she began to attend Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School, during which she was dressed in a non-conforming manner, self-harmed, and claimed false suicide attempts as a way to seek attention. She later developed sadistic and masochistic fantasies. She got a part-time job at a pet store while she attended high school, and after she graduated in 1988, she was hired by a Thorold veterinary clinic as a full-time veterinarian technician. In 1987, Paul graduated from college and got a job as a junior accountant in Price Waterhouse. His dating slowed down after his last girlfriend, Jennifer Thompson, threatened to go to the police. In May of that year, he had raped 2 women. Specifically on May 4th, he had grabbed a young woman as she was coming off the bus and brutally raped her near her parents' home. He then attempted another rape in July. The women were all between the ages of 15 and 21, and the attacks all included beatings, intense verbal abuse, and dire threats to discourage victims from going to the police, led authorities to conclude that they had all been perpetrated by the same man, whom the newspapers quickly dubbed the Scarborough Rapist. During his nearly 5-year rampage as the Scarborough Rapist, he raped or attempted to rape at least 19 young women. The victims were all young women, often grabbed around bus stops, although at least one 15-year-old was attacked in her own bedroom. A couple of his victims managed to fight him off, and Paul was eventually questioned by the police, but was never considered as an official suspect. In October, Paul and Karla met in a hotel restaurant. He was 23 and she was 17 at the time. Karla had come to Scarborough to attend a pet store conference. They were instantly attracted to one another and had sex that same night, with their friends present. From then on, they were inseparable. Paul would drive to see Karla twice a week and slowly became to control her whole life, deciding how she would be dressing, her style, what she would eat and believe in. He often called her fat and ugly. However, unlike his previous girlfriends, Karla easily submitted to and accepted his behaviour, going to even encourage his sexual behaviours. Karla wasn't a virgin when they met, and this upset him greatly, but their relationship continued. Eventually, the two became engaged, and she described to a friend, "Paul and I are happier than ever. He's being so great, so romantic, but that's typical of my honey." But the truth was that 3 years into their relationship, he was actually getting bored. He complained many times that she wasn't a virgin when they met and soon turned his sick attention to elsewhere. Paul resumed his heinous crimes in December. By March 1988, the police had set a task force to apprehend the so-called Scarborough Rapist, but their investigations went nowhere despite the amount of physical evidence and the existence of a composite sketch that wasn't shown to the public. Karla was aware of what Paul had been doing during their time period, and there were allegations from one victim that Karla was present during the attack, recording the crime on camera. However, these allegations were ignored by the police. Finally, in May 1990, the police decided to show the composite sketch to the public, launching a mass number of tips coming through to them. At the time, Paul had quit his job and got his money by smuggling cigarettes across the US-Canadian border. Friends and previous girlfriends saw the composite sketch and attempted to contact the police, but the officers were overwhelmed by all the tips that they were unable to follow up on every single one of them. In November, 2 detectives visited Paul and took blood, saliva, and hair samples from him. You would think that this is it, that they were going to catch him and stop him, but these samples were not tested for 2 years. In 1990, Paul became increasingly obsessed with Karla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy Homolka. He watched her, spied on her, and devised a plan to rape her with Karla's support and assistance. He would also make sure that Tammy remained a virgin until their plan was to be executed. During a summer trip on July 24th, involving Karla lacing Tammy's meal with Valium stolen from her workplace, but Tammy actually woke up after 1 minute before Paul could commit his depraved act. However, on December 23rd, following a Christmas dinner in the family home, they got to planning their next steps again. Karla described her sister's virginity as a Christmas gift to him. While her parents slept upstairs, the couple spiked Tammy's drink with sleeping pills, and once she was unconscious, they undressed her, and Paul proceeded to perform his cruel fantasies while Karla held a rag soaked with the aesthetic halothane she had stolen from her workplace over Tammy's nose and mouth. Tammy began to vomit and stopped breathing after Karla continued to hold her down. After they failed to revive her, both of them dressed her, moved her into her room, and cleaned up any evidence of the crime before calling 911. Although Tammy had a visible chemical burn on her face, her death was ruled as accidental. The drugs were not detected in her system either. At the funeral, Paul was caught stroking Tammy's hair as she laid in an open casket. In 1993, after her body was exhumed, it revealed that they had left a photo of them in the casket. Paul and Karla then decided it was best to move to Port Dalhousie, where they filmed themselves while role-playing sexual encounters between Paul and her sister Tammy. Karla played her sister's part and wore her clothes to reinforce the fantasy. Here is a video they took after murdering Tammy, and it's extremely unnerving the way they just got on with their lives.
Alright, wait, what are you drinking there?
Ice.
Ice? Ice baby to go?
No.
Okay, let's see what's up. We have the television and we have Karla drinking and Lori, which is absolutely not drinking.
Yeah, you look at it.
Yeah, they're the best ones.
Do you like those? They're good, eh?
Buddy, don't eat that.
What's he eating? Don't eat the paper, bud. It's the bones for you.
It's like a baby. They open the front door.
Buddy, sit.
He doesn't want to slide on it.
Oh, I'm itchy.
On June 7th, 1991, Karla had invited a teenager that she had befriended at work. She called her Jane Doe throughout the case to their new home. Karla had given her a drink laced with halicin, and she passed out. Karla told Paul that she had a wedding gift for him, and the two filmed themselves as they raped her. The victim woke up the next day with nausea, but left without realising what had happened. On June 15th, Paul took a detour to Burlington to steal licence plates to use in his smuggling business, and that's where he met 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey, who had been locked outside her home in punishment for missing her curfew. Paul offered her a cigarette, which she accepted, and he led her to his car. He pulled out a knife, blindfolded her, and drove her to Port Dalhousie, telling Karla that they had a playmate. Karla initially decided to go back to sleep instead of seeing who Leslie was, but soon after the two of them filmed themselves as they raped and tortured their new victim. However, this was about to take another depraved turn. During the crime, Leslie's blindfold slipped and she saw their faces. Their next steps was to murder her. They decided to keep her body in the basement while they dined with Karla's family upstairs. Later on, they dismembered her, encasing her remains in concrete blocks, which they then threw into Lake Gibson. Her remains were discovered on June 29th, the same day that Paul and Karla were married. In August, Jane Doe was invited over again. They mirrored what they did with Tammy, and Jane had stopped breathing while they raped her, but she was revived successfully. Karla, who had called 911, called them back and told them that everything was fine, and so that the ambulance was recalled and no one else inquired further. On April 16th, 1992, they both abducted 15-year-old Kirsten French as she exited the Holy Cross Catholic Secondary School, leaving several witnesses. They raped and tortured her for 3 days before supposedly strangling her with the same cord they used to kill Leslie. Although Paul claims that Karla murdered Kristen with the rubber mallet she was equipped with to guard the victims while he was actually out getting food. During her captivity, Kristen was never blindfolded and was forced to ingest large amounts of alcohol, watch recordings of Leslie's rape, and act in a submissive manner to Paul. However, towards the end, she became confrontational, called him a bastard, just like his mother had, and told him, "I don't know how your wife can stand being near you." Kristen was severely beaten before her death. Once again, they left the body in their home while dining with Karla's family. They later washed the body, cut her hair before they threw the remains into a ditch in Burlington, close to the cemetery where Leslie was eventually buried. At this point, Paul was interviewed by 2 police officers just a month after Kristen's murder, but they considered him an unlikely suspect even after he admitted having been interviewed before in connection with the Scarborough rapes. Soon after, they both solicited to change their legal name to Teal. On December 27th, Paul savagely beat Karla with a flashlight, leaving her with bruises on her limbs, a broken rib, and 2 black eyes. She returned to work on January 4th, 1993, and tried to pass off her injuries as a result of a minor traffic accident. Her co-workers did not believe this and called her parents, who then took her to a hospital. She claimed to be a battered spouse and filed charges against Paul, who was briefly arrested. Right around this time, those samples that Paul had given 2 years ago were finally tested, and he was officially identified as the Scarborough rapist. Karla moved to Brampton with her auntie and uncle and told them everything. In February, she sought full immunity from prosecution in exchange for cooperation, but this was denied. Instead, she was given a week to accept a 12-year prison term for manslaughter or face charges for 3 murders, including her sister Tammy's, whose case they had reopened, as well as other crimes she was tied to. Karla took the deal and testified against him at his trial in 1995. On September 1st, Paul was sentenced to life in prison without parole for at least 25 years. Due to the threats he was getting, they kept him segregated from other inmates. On one occasion in 1999, a group of 5 prisoners tried to storm the area and had to be dispersed by riot police. His official status was dangerous offender. Him being considered for parole was unlikely. He did try to apply for parole in 2018 after 25 years of being in prison, but it was denied after only 30 minutes of deliberation. A lawyer on behalf of the victims' families reported that there's never been an apology by Paul Bernardo. There's never been any indication whatsoever of remorse. He did admit this in court, emphasizing that he didn't feel anything for his victims. He was eventually moved to La Macaza Institution in Quebec and remains there today, receiving treatment for sex offenders from that facility. Karla's plea deal was severely criticized by Canadian society, especially after the tapes depicted the couple's crimes were done together at Paul's trial. Some prosecutors declared, had they known what was in the tapes, they would have never been shown at trial. Paul's first lawyer purposely hid most of the tapes for 17 months and was later charged with obstruction of justice, but he was acquitted. Karla was eventually released from prison in 2005. Having been denied the possibility of parole, she completed her full sentence of 12 years. She moved to the French Caribbean island in an attempt to avoid media scrutiny in 2007, where she married Thierry Baudelais, the brother of her lawyer, and had 3 children. The family later returned to Canada and settled in Montreal.